such a vital topic in this day and age. We encounter what we would call difficult people, obviously on a regular basis, and it's something that we have to learn to live with. You can't just go around flying off the handle and popping off all the time. When you encounter difficult people, you have to learn to make the best of that. When someone else is doing something wrong or something that is not pleasing to the Lord, that does not, by any stretch of the imagination, give us an excuse to behave the same way. So, how do we live with difficult people? We said one premise that we have, or that we should have, and that is this idea that God will judge the wrong and vindicate the right. The premise is that many of us take care of our own problems, or at least we want to. That's our desire, but you can't do that because you're stressing yourself out, worrying about things that God Himself wants to deal with. So let Him do those things and let Him take care of those things. We said this, number one, we see the appeal of Moses. Moses comes to Pharaoh. He says, let my people go. That is the appeal. Pharaoh says, I don't think so. And then off goes the story, and we know what happens. We said, letter A, Moses spoke for God. It's so important to understand that Moses got the message that he was delivering from God. God is the one who gave that message to him. God is the one who delivered the message to Moses, and Moses in turn gave that message to Pharaoh. So we said he spoke for God. But not only did he speak for God, he learned to be a salesman and to market himself in what he was delivering. And then we said this, letter B, he spoke for God's people. Not only did he speak for God, but he spoke for God's people. And the comical thing, if you choose that word to describe it, is that by the time word got around, the people of God didn't want Moses speaking for them. Right? They were mad. They were upset. And why is that? Because of the way Pharaoh responded. Right? Pharaoh responded by making things more difficult, making things harder. But God gave them the message, and Moses spoke for God, but he also spoke for the people. We talked about Amy Carmichael and how she dialed in on what God wanted for her, the specific thing, the desire that He had, and she launched out and became very successful as a missionary because she realized and understood what God desired to do with her life. And it's so important that we do that good, that acceptable, that perfect will of God. We said, number two, we see the arrogance of Pharaoh. The arrogance of Pharaoh. Why do we say Pharaoh was arrogant? Well, because even though Moses said God had delivered the message, Pharaoh was not interested in hearing it. And he even spoke to that regard. He told Moses that he didn't know the God he was talking about and really wasn't caring about what that message was. He couldn't care less. And so we see the arrogance that Pharaoh had when Moses said, hey, we need to go out and we need to worship our God and you need to let us go and do that. We begin to see the arrogance of Pharaoh shown. We talked about this man who said that if he could get a certain percentage of the vote, that even God Himself could not keep him from becoming president. But it seems that he did, as he was in office for just one day. And a very interesting story there. Letter A, he was motivated by pride. Why would Pharaoh become so arrogant? Why would Pharaoh show his arrogance in such a way? We said letter A, because he was motivated by pride. Again, make sure you have all these things in here. We talked about so much stuff within regards to this. So we talked about this last week. What is pride? Well, obviously it's important to understand what pride is. It's important to understand what the Scripture teaches us about pride and what that pride is. We said in understanding what pride is, we need to begin to understand some things that are telltale signs, right? And we said one of those signs comes from Proverbs 13:10, and that is the issue of contention. We said number 2 comes from Proverbs 14 and verse number 3. It's called foolish speaking. We begin to see that pride bubbling out, if you will, and we see it in the means of foolish speaking and contention. And then the third one comes from Proverbs 28:25, and that is strife. All three of these things are major symptoms of pride. A lot of issues that we deal with, physical, things that we experience sickness, and how do we know that we have the common cold? You might want to tell me what's the reason you know you start what? You start coughing, you start sniffling, you start sneezing. So you say, Pastor Edge, why do these symptoms help us to see spiritually speaking? Well, I don't know. Why don't you ask yourself the same question when it comes to the physical? Because it's okay to do it then. It's okay to say, oh, my throat's a little raspy and my nose is running. I wonder if I have the cold. Well, how do you know? Well, because of the symptoms. Yeah. Well, you know what? I got a little strife in my life. I wonder if I've got pride. See, why couldn't you do the same thing? I got a little foolish speaking in my life. I wonder if I'm having some issues with pride. I got a little contention that's in my life. I wonder if I'm struggling a little bit with pride. You see, why don't we take the spiritual aspects of life and apply them much the same way as we do physical or mental or other issues that we face? It's like we want to act like the spiritual is some kind of supernatural. But God said, hey, let me show you in the book of Proverbs how that you can tell when some pride is starting to creep in, when pride is starting to manifest itself, when pride is starting to take over, and that's strife, that's foolish speaking, that's contention, all from Proverbs, trying to help us to see those symptoms. Then we said this, you have blanks for this in your notes, I believe. We want to make sure we understand that this thing of pride is a damaging sin. It's a damaging sin. Make sure to get it in your notes. It's a damaging sin. In other words, if you continue to exercise pride in your life, I can guarantee it's going to damage you. It's going to damage you. How many of you think when it comes to driving, it's okay for us to accelerate quickly and to short stop at stop signs and red lights and to slam on the brakes aggressively and to almost sideswipe and cut people off while you're driving down the interstate? I'm just talking about the people that I drive with. Because, yeah, so since I'm starting my new job, I'm driving on the interstate more, and now I know why I didn't want to work outside of the south side. Yeah, because of the way people drive. But hey, how many of you think it's okay to do that? Is it okay? No, it's not okay. And let me ask you this question, and maybe, just maybe I shouldn't be this way, but isn't it interesting how the people who drive the worst have the most beat up cars on the road? It's like they're like, well, I'm going to buy a car that I can just sideswipe and crash into people with, and I won't worry about it. Here we go! The woman that almost cuts you off when you slam on the brake, you look at the door, and it's like, that color's not supposed to be on the side of that door. Looks like she sideswiped somebody else, right? Notice I said she. But he, too, he could have sideswiped somebody else. But is it okay? No, it's not okay to drive that way, because sooner or later, your vehicle's going to be damaged. Right? And let me just tell you something. Don't even try hammering the gas and trying to get back at them, because that's damaging too. Because you're going to be the one that can't stop fast enough when everybody else is stopping it. And then he's going to be looking in the mirror at you when you smash into the back of his car. No, we don't want to do that. So we have to be careful when we drive. The same thing goes with our life. As we live our life, we have to be careful to eliminate certain things. Pride is one of those things that we want to eliminate from our spiritual driving habits. Why? Because if we let it into our life, it's going to damage us. It's going to cause some problems. It's going to take some issues and begin to develop some things. It's a damaging sin. Then we said this, you got another blank, write it, fill it in. It's a deceptive sin. It's a deceptive sin. Most people, we said last week, are quite proud of their humility. And that's deceptive. Right? Pride is deceptive. And it's not just damaging to you. It's deceptive because it causes you to begin to live your life in a certain way that is not acceptable to God. But yet you, in your own mind, you have justified it. Let's go back to the driving illustration. How many of you feel like when this person who's driving down the road, cutting everybody off, how many of you think that person cares when you pull up beside them and yell at them? No, they couldn't care less. Do you think today was the first day that they drove like that? No, that's who they are. They think it's okay. It's become deceptive, right? Pride, same way. Pride is the same way. When you let pride start to manifest itself in your life, it begins to deceive you in such a way that oftentimes we personally are the last people to know that pride has crept into our hearts. Everybody around you can see it. They can see that foolish talk. They can see that contention. They can see those symptoms. But we don't see it because Satan is using it in such a deceptive fashion that it's tearing us apart inside, but we don't even see it. Pride destroys. Pride is damaging. Pride is deceptive. What pride is not. We gave the illustration of the old couple, and we need to understand Proverbs 8 and verse 13. There is a particular kind of pride that God hates. He despises it. And we'll talk about that here again in a moment. But a self-respect is not a pride that God hates. That sense of self-respect about ourselves, or we talked a great deal last week about being proud of our children, our kids, or things that they're doing. That's not a bad thing. But we have to understand the difference. We have to understand what it is and what it is not. Pride that Jesus or that God hates is a pride that stems from self-righteousness. It's that arrogance that Pharaoh had. Exodus 7, verses 22 and 23. And the magicians of Egypt did so with their enchantments, and Pharaoh's heart was hardened, neither did he hearken unto them, as the Lord had said. And Pharaoh turned and went into his house, neither did he set his heart to this also. I believe it's clear that when it comes to the wrong kind of pride, the self-righteousness that pride stems from, that pride, I believe, comes from Satan. Jot this down in your notes if you don't already have it. It is there on the bottom of the second page, Isaiah chapter 14. Let's put an asterisk beside that. Isaiah 14 verses 13 and 14. I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Who's talking here? The archangel, right? He's decided that he's going to overthrow. Proverbs 6, a proud look. One of the top 7 things on God's list. Mark chapter number 7, John said, and speaks of the pride of life. Listen, it's not of the Father, but it's of the world. 1 John 2 and verse 15 also reminds us, Pharaoh's pride should serve as a reminder for us to search our hearts and to humble ourselves before the Lord. Let me give you one simple thing, new material tonight. Letter B, let me see this. He was motivated by prejudice. He was motivated by prejudice. Exodus chapter 8, verse 25, on through the passage. And Pharaoh called for Moses and for Aaron, and said, Go ye sacrifice to your God in the land. And Moses said, It is not meet so to do. For we shall sacrifice the abomination of the Egyptians to the Lord our God. Lo, shall we sacrifice the abomination of the Egyptians before their eyes? And will they not stone us? I want you to maybe jot down something, maybe put a line, maybe put a bit of an asterisk or something there. I want to speak to this in regards to this idea of prejudice in this particular story. Pharaoh believed that no matter what was going on, that his way had to be the right way, and that the children of Israel ought to surrender to his will. Moses, however, knew that God had told him to do a certain thing, and he would not give in. Pay close attention to this, folks. We live in a day and age where people are swayed with every wind of doctrine. The Bible does not approve of that. The Bible does not by any stretch of the imagination tell us that it is acceptable or that it is okay for us to be constantly swayed by whatever's going on around us. We are to stand firm. We live in a society today where everybody is preaching acceptance. It doesn't matter what everybody's doing as long as they're doing something, and if they're doing something, then you should learn to accept that. That is the world in which we live. Well, I'm here to tell you, I don't have to accept it if I don't want to. We live in a day and age where people believe that everything they're doing should be accepted, but what you're doing is never to be included. The catchphrase, and believe me, I've heard a lot of it these last 3 weeks, but the catchphrase and the buzzword is inclusion. You include everybody into everything that you're doing. Except people that believe like you. And you're not to be included. Because you're different. You're different. Can I tell you what Pharaoh was trying to do in his own little way all the way back in the book of Exodus? He was trying to preach to Moses and Aaron inclusion. You can worship your God amongst my people worshiping their God. Now here's the catch. This is what I want you to take home with you. I want you to mull this over. We got a bunch of things to talk about, but time doesn't permit us to get into it tonight. We'll touch on it again next week, but I want to say this. It is believed that Pharaoh wanted Moses and Aaron and the people of God to go ahead and sacrifice, but the only people who would leave would be the men, the family, and the women would stay. It is also believed, but he said, don't go very far. You can sacrifice, you can go away, but don't go too far. It's also believed that he said, you know what? I want you to sacrifice, but now I've changed my mind. I just want you to do it right here. Now, why was that a problem? Moses refused to compromise in even the smallest of matters. God's way was the only way. When the devil can get you to compromise, he will get you to change. Moses said, I'm not going to change. I'm not going to compromise. I'm not even going to entertain the thought. God is the one who gave me the message. God is the one who delivered this to me. And God is the one that I am going to be obedient to. I want to make sure that I do exactly what God tells me to do. As best we can tell, from studying the time period in which the scripture falls, it's pretty certain that Moses believed a compromise would cost them their lives. Well, you say, Pastor Ed, I thought we were talking spiritual. Now we just transitioned. All of a sudden we're talking physical. Absolutely, we're talking physical. Death, physical death. The reason being, our belief, our being Moses, Aaron, the people of God in the book of Exodus, was to sacrifice an animal, that animal and the shedding of blood from that animal would pay for their sin for a certain period of time. This is Old Testament teaching, right? The Egyptians believed in reincarnation. What does that mean? What that means is that the Egyptians worshipped animals. Don't touch that animal, Miss Dell. That could be my uncle. Do you know there are places around the world that are starving to death while cow and cattle walk down the streets? Reincarnation. Pharaoh, who we said was pretty conniving, said, I got an idea. How about you guys just worship right here amongst all of our people? Brother Henry, do you think they might have stood up in their colleges of the day and their professors would say, it's all about inclusion, Pharaoh. Let's get Moses and Aaron and the people of God to worship with us. Understanding that the first time they tried to kill one of their ancestors who had come back as an animal, they would have been killed themselves.
Right.
Very interesting concept. We'll get into it a little bit more next week, but I want you to think about that. I want you to think about, again, I want you to think about how that Moses standing firm on what God told him literally could have saved the lives of the children of Israel. Because in this day in which we live, we're more prone to say, oh, you're going to let us worship? We just need to do it here. Oh, thank you so much for letting us do what? This is what lets us. I don't need anybody else's permission. And think about it. What could have happened if Moses would have been willing to bend with everything that Pharaoh had to say? Let's pray. Shall we, dear Jesus, thank you for tonight.